What are the key documents that underpin relations between the two continents? Historically, the EU dealt and still deals with Africa under three separate groupings. Sub-Saharan Africa, within the African, Caribbean and Pacific group under the Cotonou Agreement, Northern Africa and South Africa. For this reason, in 2007, the EU, African states and the AU agreed the joint Africa-EU strategy to treat Africa as one. The other agreements are still in place, and now I'll go into more detail about them. The Cotonou Agreement is the foundation of Africa-Europe relations. It was signed in 2000 and is valid until 2020. It is legally binding and creates obligations and rights for both sides, European and African, on common values and principles of governance. It builds on and replaces previous agreements between EU and ACP countries, the Lomé Conventions. An EU assistance is provided through the European Development Fund, or EDF, to which EU member states contribute. I'll now also say a few words about the Economic Partnership Agreements, or EPAs. Under Cotonou, all sub-Saharan countries used to have unilateral preferential access to the EU market. They could export goods to the EU market without having to pay tariffs. To comply with new WTO rules, this system is to be replaced by a new type of agreement, the EPAs. Difficult negotiations between the EU and 5 regional groupings of African countries have been going on for more than a decade with limited success. This has created many frustrations. The Commission set October 2014 as the deadline for African countries to choose their trade regime with the EU. More information on EPAs and negotiations are available in ECDPM's publications and website. ECDPM provides updates about the negotiations around EPAs every month. The EU has a strategic partnership with South Africa since 2007. Trade negotiations with South Africa are guided by the framework of a special trading agreement, the 1999 Trade Development Cooperation Agreement. South Africa is also now negotiating an economic partnership agreement. The financial instrument supporting the partnership with South Africa differs, being the Development Cooperation Instrument. Relations with Algeria, Egypt, Libya, Morocco and Tunisia are managed under 2 other frameworks. These countries are part of the European Neighbourhood Policy, which includes countries in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. They are also part of the so-called Barcelona process, started in the 1990s, which forms the basis of the Euromed partnership. This process has now led to the creation of the Union for the Mediterranean, which is a framework for multilateral cooperation between the EU and 15 Mediterranean countries. Under the Euromed partnership, the EU has concluded free trade agreements with all North African countries, with the exception of Libya. Cooperation with North African countries is financed by the European Neighbourhood Instrument. In addition, the EU also designed its own sub-regional strategies, which include the Strategy for the Sahel, the Strategic Framework for the Horn of Africa, the Strategic Framework for the Gulf of Guinea, and the Strategic Framework for the Great Lakes region. To overcome this fragmented approach to Africa, the EU, AU and European and African states adopted the joint EU-Africa strategy, the JAES, in 2007 at the Africa-EU Summit of Lisbon in Portugal. The years leading up to the JAES were characterised by changes in global geopolitics, the changing nature of Africa and the coming of other development partners looking for opportunities in Africa. The main objectives of the JAES are to treat Africa as one, to strengthen the political and strategic dialogue between the 2 countries, and to replace the previous donor-recipient dynamic by a partnership on an equal footing. The JAES involves the continental organs of both the AU and the EU, member states in Africa and Europe, and non-state actors from the 2 continents. And the JAES is supposed to be people-centred. Up till now, 2 action plans have been agreed. The second action plan, in place since 2011, has 8 partnerships: peace and security, democratic governance and human rights, trade, regional integration and infrastructure, the Millennium Development Goals, energy, climate change and environment, migration, mobility and employment, and science, information and space. EPAs are dealt outside the joint EU-Africa strategy, although they have proved to be a controversial topic between the two continents and a major irritant to their relations.